Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. It is in Happy Valley. How about this? A top 5 matchup between Ohio State and Penn State. Ohio State comes into this game as a 3.5-point favorite. The over-under set at 45.5. And let me start by saying this. I think there's kind of a bogus narrative going on about this game. So I've seen a lot on social media of like, who does this game mean more to? Ryan Day or James Franklin? Well, we're going to get into all the injury situations in a minute. But to me, there's no doubt that it's Ryan Day, okay? I think you could argue it's maybe the biggest game of Ryan Day's career because from the Penn State perspective, and I've talked to Penn State fans about this, is Drew Aller isn't 100%. Again, we're going to get into it. But at the same time, if Penn State loses this game, it's not the end of the world. And I've had Penn State fans tell me straight up, like, I would rather lose this game and know that Drew Aller is at 100%. That is the much bigger issue for a Penn State team. Their final 4 games, Washington, at Purdue, at Minnesota, and then Maryland to wrap the season. Just having Drew Aller is way more important than winning this game. That's kind of the gift and curse of the college football playoff. But for Ohio State, this is big for Ryan Day. And for people who don't understand why I would say it's the biggest game of Ryan Day's career, just look at the Big Ten standings. If Ohio State loses this game on Saturday, and again, we're working under the assumption that Oregon is going to beat Michigan. We'll talk about that momentarily. Ohio State will be 2 games behind both Oregon and Penn State in the league standings, meaning they would need one of those 2 teams to lose 3 times in the final 4 games for Ohio State to make the Big Ten championship. Remember, Ohio State has not made a Big Ten championship game since the 2020 COVID season. They have not obviously been to Indianapolis the last 3 years after losing to Michigan in those 3 years. And so if you're Ryan Day, if you lose this game, you're probably looking at somewhere, you're not going to the Big Ten championship game. You're probably opening the college football playoff on the road. So you talk about a game with a lot on the line. I don't think anybody has more at stake than Ryan Day in this game. Let's dive in. And unfortunately, I really hate to say it, is the story of this game is the injuries. For Penn State, we know the situation. Drew Aller is their starting quarterback, was their starting quarterback. He goes down against Wisconsin last week on a Saturday night road game. First off, credit to Penn State for rallying without him. I said it on Monday's Aaron Torres pod, but that's the kind of game that Penn State kind of sort of historically loses. You lose your starting quarterback, you kind of fold like a cheap tent. Did not happen. Beau Pribula comes in and is effective. In terms of this game, I think what's important to note, James Franklin was asked about it earlier in the week, and he said point blank, listen, we're not sure yet. Both guys are going to get first team reps. For people who aren't familiar with Drew Aller's injury, it is an MCL. It doesn't need surgery. So there is a possibility that he can play, but I don't think we're going to know, frankly, until kickoff. And I don't think James Franklin is kind of like, to use a bad pun, I don't think he's pulling our leg. Like, I think it really is going to be a game time decision. I think in some ways it might actually help Penn State. Beau Pribula, is much more of a runner than Drew Aller is. So the fact that Ohio State has to prepare for both, I think is a good thing for Penn State. Oh, by the way, I think it's also worth noting, I wouldn't be surprised even if Aller starts if we don't see Pribula in some situations. So that's the update on the injuries at Penn State. Ohio State, man, there's nothing else to say other than that O-line is banged up. Not making excuses for last week, but coming into this one, I'll say this. I saw an article this week. I thought it was really well done, explaining that Josh Simmons, who was Ohio State's starting left tackle, was arguably the most indispensable player on the team. Because at quarterback, you got guys that can back up Will Howard. You got depth at running back. You got depth at wide receiver. You got depth on defense. The O-line was thin to begin with. Josh Simmons, the starting left tackle, goes down against Oregon. His backup gets hurt against Nebraska. And we saw the results of it. It was not a pretty performance from the Ohio State Buckeyes in that game last week. They were held to 2.1 yards per carry. I'm not a scheme expert by any stretch, but Joel Klatt and Gus and all them did a good job of explaining how they were attacking Nebraska was the new offensive tackle for Ohio State. And you'd assume that Penn State, with that elite defense, as always, is going to do the same. Ohio State really struggled last week. First 4 possessions of the second half were all 3 and outs. They barely survived. So let's get into this game, and let's get into the pick. And I'll actually say this. To me, the pick in this game, it's actually, to me, the easiest pick of the entire weekend. I like the under 45.5. Okay. Because I just think all you have to do is, first of all, I don't know how anybody can confidently say that either team is going to win or how they're going to win or what it's going to look like. Because if you actually break this down, do we know the quarterback situation at Penn State? Do we know how Ohio State's going to try to compensate for the lack of for the injuries on the offensive line? So we don't have that information. And so because of it, I just think the under is just so obvious to me. First off, go back to last year, right? It was actually weirdly similar circumstances. Penn State, young quarterback on the road. James Franklin didn't want to put a lot on his plate. Ohio State clearly did not trust Kyle McCord, he was the fall guy for the entire season last year. And what ended up happening? It was a 30-12 final score, or 20-12 final score, excuse me. And even that score was a little bit deceptive, because Penn State did not score a touchdown until late in the game, when the game was very clearly over. So this game didn't even come close to the 45.5 points that we have on the board this week. And when I look at this game, it really comes down to pretty simply what I said. You can look at Nick Singleton's stats at Penn State, and you can look at Emeka Egbuka here and Jeremiah Smith there and da-da-da-da. All you have to do is just, in your head, how do you think both coaches are going to coach given the circumstances? I think both coaches are going to coach tight to the vest. If you're Penn State, you're at home. You have an elite defense going up against a run game that is really struggling right now. Penn State's run defense is top 5 nationally. You're going up against a banged up quarterback. Will Howard, in theory, is not going to have a ton of time to throw. Where does Ohio State get its offense from? And then from the Penn State side of things, like, O-line's in better shape. Running game is solid. But the counter to that is, again, what is the quarterback situation? How healthy is Drew Aller? How much are you going to put him in harm's way? But then let me take it a step further. Like, even if Purbulla comes in, even if Purbulla plays, by the way, he's more of the running quarterback than Drew Aller is. But if Drew Aller can't play, you can't run Purbulla, because that means that you could be down to your 3rd string quarterback if the backup gets hurt. We're not wishing injuries, obviously, but I think you get the point. And so I could go on and on. But to me, I think this is a low possession, low scoring game. Go ahead, give me the under of 45.5. I can't even pick a winner. Like, I know you guys want me to, gun to my head. I don't know. We don't know the quarterback situation at Penn State. I'd lean Ohio State. I don't feel great about it. They have a ton of weapons. James Franklin seems to have an Ohio State problem, but I just think the under is my official pick, my official best bet. It is a total stay away from the win-loss, point spread perspective.